I'm going to jump right into this. Title of the book, Being a Leader with Courage, How to Succeed in Your C-Level Position in 18 Months or Less. Interviewed 30 CEOs. And the question may be, why'd you do that? And one of the things I learned, and I heard it from Heidrick and Struggles when I first started the firm Value Drivers, which was about 9 months ago. I heard the statistic that 40 to 50% of C-level execs are fired, quit, or pushed out of their jobs in the first 18 months that they're in the job. And I heard that from Heidrick, and then I heard it from the Corporate Executive Board, and I heard it from a third group about a month ago, 2 months ago, from Seattle, said the same thing. And I asked the group from Seattle, I said, how long has this been going on? And they said, about 20 years. So it's not a new phenomena. And then when you dig a little deeper and you say, why is it happening? You get all different kinds of answers. They're hiring from the outside more. They are, these people have, just weren't prepared to take on the jobs. The job was bigger than they thought. They hired the wrong person, but a lot of different things. But really nothing that I found was definitive. And then another statistic just came out. 46% of all employees fail in the first 2 years in the job. Doesn't matter what level they're at. 46% of employees are failing in their jobs. So I went out and interviewed 30 CEOs to find out who were successful. What did they do to be successful? And when they're hired, they're brought in. I'd say 80% of the CEOs I interviewed came from outside their companies. And when they're brought in with a mission. The board, their investors, their bankers. They want something different than they've had before. So they want the new CEO, it could also be a CFO, a CMO, to do something different than they have done. But when they get in there, they find there's all kinds of landmines and traps that they have to avoid or minimize, or they have to recover from. Any of you have any ideas, what some of those might be? Because most of you are in leadership positions, CEO positions in your companies. What sorts of things have you had to avoid, minimize, or recover from when you've moved into a new job? Anyone got any ideas? David?
Well, quite often you have to recover from, severe cash issues. Sometimes
Okay.
you got to refund the company in order to keep it going.
Okay, so there's performance issues within the company. You got to, David, the other David. Inertia. Status quo. That's probably the toughest one. Anyone got any other ideas? I've got a list here as well, of course. Tell you what some of the ones are that they've run into. A new boss. Even if you're the CEO, you have a boss. It might be the board. It might be the owner of the company. But you have a new boss, and you have to get, used to him or her. There's new strategic challenges. Things you've probably never faced before. New expectations. Maybe it's the performance turnaround that David mentioned. New direct reports, people you don't know, people that don't know you. New products, new markets, new customers, new countries, new distributors. That list can be endless. Status quo, as David said. That's probably the biggest challenge most of the CEOs I spoke to say they face when they come in, and that they have to get beyond that. But even bigger is a new culture, a new corporate culture, a new organization's culture that they have to learn and adapt to. So in the process of talking to the 30, I identified what the keys were to their success. And it isn't about their character. Their character is all, that's all very good. So this isn't going to be a talk like so many others around character of these leaders. These are going to be more about their skills and their habits that they've developed and that they found prevented them from being derailed in the job. So let's talk about the first of them. There's 9 of them, 9 derailers. And the first is, and this was always mentioned as number 1 by the people I talked to, understanding the culture, honoring that culture. To just come in and say, we're going to change it, many found out was a big mistake. And if they don't, they run into this problem that they're unable to get buy-in or implement strategies that they think are important to move the company forward. Peter Drucker said it well. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. I can't really embellish on that. I mean, that's how important culture is. And what the CEOs found is they would be successful if they would do the first one, drive from a deep and genuine respect for what the organization has accomplished. How have they gotten where they are today? To ignore that or to say we've got to change all that leads to a lot of problems. They were very good, the CEOs I talked to, at thinking about the impact they wanted to make first, and then they thought about the change and how they would drive it. So with this understanding of the culture, they could then start to prioritize or strategize how they would make that impact and in what sequence they would do it. And last, they let the sources of organization pride determine their priorities and the pace that they went at. So the key takeaway there is you have to respect the organization's culture. And to just ignore it is setting yourself up for potentially a big failure. So we talk a lot about culture, but really, what is it? And I'll just go through it quickly. It's a collection of shared beliefs and assumptions that are, throughout that organization. And I asked a lot of the CEOs, even, let me go back to my wife. She was interviewing for a new job. And she said, what should I ask the person? I said, well, you want to find out about the culture. Yeah, I'm going to ask them, tell me about the culture. I said, good question, but you won't get a great answer. I said, a better question is, what's not tolerated around here? What in your culture is not tolerated? And everyone can answer that. But if you ask them, what's the culture? You're going to hear things like ethics and integrity and honesty, which just about every company is going to tell you. But if you say, what's not tolerated here? You might hear something like what Kyle Seymour, the CEO of S&C Electric, found out. He had been on the board of S&C, which is just up on the north side of Chicago. Huge operation, 45-acre industrial park up there. And what he found out, he had been on the board for 2 years. So he thought, I know the cultural norms, I know the operating norms, I know what goes on around here. So he accepts the CEO position. And then he proceeds to take some time off after Christmas. Big problem. The former CEO had rigorously enforced a policy of you do not take time off before or after a significant paid holiday. And here's the new CEO coming in, and he took a vacation. The uproar that caused within the company was huge, and the damage control Kyle had to do was even bigger. And it's a great example. If he had asked, what's not tolerated around here? He might have heard, you don't take vacation after a paid holiday. But he didn't know it. He doesn't do it now. And he's slowly changing that practice. But that's a great example of, what are the shared beliefs and assumptions that everyone just thinks you know, but aren't written down anywhere. Other things that define culture, you find they're embedded in organizational practices, like the example I just gave you from Kyle. It's how things get done on a day-to-day basis. And if you're a really good observer, you'll see them in the behaviors of groups and of individuals in the company. But probably most important, the culture is amplified. Those values, those practices, those behaviors are amplified by the leaders of the company. Tony Hsieh, the CEO of Zappos, found a quote from him. It was in the Tribune. And he was explaining their culture, which I guess is a very definitive culture. And he tells the interviewer from the Tribune that every new employee that he meets with, he explains that the company's values are not suggestions. He says, if you do not follow them, they are grounds for termination. And apparently they fired people over these things. But that's how serious he is about it, that the values are not suggestions. You really have to walk the talk. So and he's a great example of it. So it's amplified by the behaviors of the leaders of the company. So that's culture. That was the number one derailer that the CEOs I talked to said, if you don't follow it or respect it, you can expect trouble.